She found a deserted mine and built a solar kingdom for her village. The earth was trying to swallow it whole. Rusted cables dangled from collapsed scaffold frames, like the tendons of something long dead. The conveyor belts had seized decades ago, frozen mid-motion, still angled toward a sky they'd never reach again. Thorn scrub pushed up through cracked concrete. The mountains above shimmered in heat that could crack stone. And somewhere beneath it all, 300 feet down into darkness, the old shafts breathed warm, stale air like a sleeping giant that didn't know the world had moved on. Nadia Karim knew that feeling well. Nadia was 31 years old and had grown up with a single extension cord running through a hole in the kitchen wall. That cord, strung from a diesel generator her father ran for 4 hours each evening, had powered everything her family owned. One bare bulb above the table, a second-hand radio, the small fan her mother slept beside in July. For 28 years, that cord had been the entire electrical infrastructure of the Karim household in the valley of Deir ez-Zor, a remote settlement of 400 families tucked into the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, a place that national grid maps had simply never reached. She was not unusual. Every family in Deir ez-Zor lived by the same arithmetic: diesel generators, expensive fuel hauled up mountain roads that became impassable 6 months a year, kerosene lamps when the generator went down, which was often, children doing homework by phone screen light, clinics that couldn't keep medicines refrigerated, a school that canceled classes on winter afternoons because the heating had run out again. Nadia had left for university on a scholarship. She had studied civil engineering in Kabul, then energy systems in Istanbul on a grant she applied for 6 times before it was awarded. She had worked on solar installation projects in Morocco, grid development in Jordan, renewable feasibility studies in 3 countries. She was, by any reasonable measure, precisely the kind of person who had escaped. But she had come back. She always knew she would. She came back to the extension cord in the kitchen wall. She came back to her mother squinting at her embroidery by lamplight. She came back to the sound her father made, that particular quiet exhale, every time fuel prices rose again. And she came back to the mine. The Deir ez-Zor extraction site had operated for 11 years beginning in the late 1970s, copper mostly, some iron ore, before the geology proved uncooperative and the economics collapsed. It had been abandoned almost overnight, the way industrial projects always are when the money decides to leave. The equipment was left, the shafts were left, the roads built to service it, 3 kilometers of brutally engineered mountain track, were left. Everything simply stopped. For 40 years, the site had been the valley's most visible wound. Children were told to stay away. Adults did, mostly, except the few who occasionally stripped useful metal from its edges. The regional government had twice declared intentions to rehabilitate it, and twice forgotten those intentions. Nadia walked the site for 3 days before she said a single word to anyone about what she was thinking. She walked in the early morning, when the thermal signature of the deep shafts was most measurable against the cool air. She had a thermometer, a compass, and a notebook. She measured shaft temperatures at various depths. She calculated surface area available for collector installation. She looked at the angle of the mountain slopes above the site, south-facing steep, receiving direct solar radiation for 9 to 11 hours daily in summer, 7 to 8 even in the harshest winter months. Then she sat at the lip of the main shaft, shaft number 3, the deepest, dropping 280 feet into warm, stable darkness, and she looked up at the white and burning sky above her. The valley had no power, but it sat beneath one of the most relentlessly irradiated landscapes on Earth. That, she thought, was not a problem. That was an inheritance. The question was whether anyone else would see it that way. They didn't. Not at first, not even close. The village elder, a cautious man named Habib Khan, who had been making decisions for Deir ez-Zor for 22 years, listened to Nadia's initial proposal across a low table with a politeness so careful it was almost unkind. "The mine is cursed ground," he said, when she had finished. "3 men died in it. Everyone knows this." 3 men died because of inadequate ventilation in 1981, Nadia said. "That is not a curse. That is a documented engineering failure." Habib Khan nodded slowly, the way people nod when they have decided not to be persuaded. The Women's Council was more interested, but more afraid. The project would require outside funding, outside engineers, outside attention. Outside attention meant scrutiny. Scrutiny, in a region with a complicated recent history, was not a neutral thing. "What happens if they come and decide they want the site for themselves?" asked a woman named Mariam, whose instincts about external interests had been sharpened by decades of hard experience. It was not an unreasonable question. The young men were enthusiastic and immediately began proposing modifications that would have tripled the budget and halved the likelihood of completion. Nadia had expected all of this. She had, in a sense, rehearsed for it for years without knowing she was rehearsing. What she had not expected was her father. Her father, who had run that diesel generator for 28 years, who had paid for her education by working construction in Kabul every summer, who had told her since she was 7 years old that she had the kind of mind that could build something real. Her father looked at her drawing spread across the kitchen table and said, very quietly, "It is too much, Nadia, even for you." She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the roof of the family house as she had done as a girl and looked at the stars with the specific clarity that only comes in places with no light pollution, which was, she thought grimly, precisely the problem she was trying to solve. By morning, she had decided that doubt, including her father's, was simply data. She filed it alongside the thermal measurements and the solar irradiance tables and continued. The funding process took 14 months. She applied to 7 international development organizations. 4 did not respond. 1 responded with a form rejection. 1 requested a feasibility study she spent 3 months producing and then went silent. The 7th, a Swiss-Afghan Renewable Development Partnership, requested a meeting, then another meeting, then a site visit that required Nadia to arrange transportation, accommodation, security for 4 engineers traveling from Zurich. She arranged all of it. She borrowed her cousin's truck. She cooked for the engineers herself because there was no restaurant within 60 kilometers. She translated simultaneously from Dari to English while walking shaft number 3 with a headlamp, pointing out thermal stability data she had been collecting for 11 months. The lead Swiss engineer, a compact, meticulous man named Thomas, stood at the base of the shaft, looked at his temperature readings, looked at Nadia's documentation, and said, "You did all this data collection yourself?" "Yes," she said. "Over how long?" 11 months. He was quiet for a moment. "We funded a project in Kenya last year," he said. "The local coordinator had a team of 6 and a full data collection budget." "I had a thermometer," Nadia said. Thomas almost smiled. "How much do you need?" The funding came in tranches. The first covered materials. The second covered specialist labor for the molten salt thermal storage installation, a technology Nadia had studied in Morocco, adapted here to the unique geometry of the abandoned shafts. The third tranche, awarded after the first phase passed technical inspection, covered the solar collector array. The collectors rose from the ruins of the old extraction rigs. This was the part that still startles people when they see the photographs. The rusted steel frames of the abandoned mining equipment, the head frames, the conveyor towers, the processing platform supports, were not demolished. They were repurposed. Nadia had designed the collector mounting system specifically around the existing structures, calculating load tolerances, repositioning angles, welding new frames onto old foundations. The total steel salvage reduced material costs by 31%. "Why build new when the skeleton is already standing?" she said to Thomas when he raised an eyebrow at the approach. "Because new things work," he said. "These will too," she said. And they did. The thermal storage system was the technological heart of the project. Molten salt, a mixture of sodium and potassium nitrate, heated by the concentrated solar collectors above, was pumped down into the deep shafts where the stable underground temperature created near-perfect insulation conditions. the salt retained heat at temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius, releasing it as needed to drive a steam turbine and generate electricity. Unlike conventional solar panels, which produce power only when the sun shines, the molten salt system could store enough thermal energy to generate power through the night and into overcast days. For a valley where the sun was abundant but the nights were cold and long, this was not a technical detail. It was the entire point. The construction took 18 months. There were setbacks that felt, at the time, like endings. A structural failure in the secondary shaft lining during month 6 that required complete redesign. A supply chain collapse during month 11 that left the project without critical valve components for 9 weeks. A rock fall during month 14 that injured 2 workers, neither seriously, but it stopped work for 3 weeks while safety protocols were reviewed and reinforced. Nadia did not sleep normally for 18 months. She kept a cot in the site office, a repurposed storage container, and spent her nights reviewing plans, sourcing materials, writing updates to funders in 3 languages, and occasionally simply sitting in the dark entrance of shafts number 3, listening to the warm air rising from below. She was not, she told herself on the harder nights, building a power plant. She was building proof that the valley was worth investing in, proof that the people living in it had not been forgotten by the future, proof that the girl who grew up by the light of a single bulb on an extension cord could, in fact, build something real. Her father had said it was too much, even for her. She thought about that often. The commissioning day was a Tuesday in October, which felt anticlimactic right up until it didn't. The valley had gathered, not all of it, but most of it. Habib Khan was there, in the front row, his earlier skepticism worn away by 18 months of watching Nadia work. Mariam from the Women's Council stood beside him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The young men who had offered unhelpful modifications were there, taking photographs. Thomas had flown back from Zurich. He stood slightly to one side, as engineers do, watching the gauges. Nadia's mother and father stood together near the back. The startup sequence was unglamorous, a series of valve activations, pressure readings, generator checks. Nadia went through them methodically, the way she had rehearsed them hundreds of times. Her hands were steady. Inside, something she couldn't name was pulling very tight. And then the turbine engaged, the power flowed, and 300 meters away, at the distribution board that connected the plant to the valley's newly installed microgrid, a bank of indicator lights turned green. In Deir ez-Zor, 400 families switched on their lights, not metaphorically, not gradually, all at once, because Nadia had coordinated it that way, had asked every household to have their lights switched to on before the commissioning, so that the moment power reached the grid, the whole valley would light up simultaneously. It did. From the ridge above the site, which Nadia had not planned to climb but found herself climbing anyway in the minutes after commissioning, she could see it. The valley below, which she had looked down at her entire life as a scatter of dark shapes against darker mountains, was lit. Every house, the school, the clinic, the small mosque with its single minaret, the road her father had driven 1,000 times in darkness, all of it lit. She sat on the ridge for a long time. Below her, she could hear the valley celebrating, music somewhere, the sound of many voices. Her phone was ringing, she could feel it vibrating in her pocket, and she knew it was her father, and she knew what he was going to say, and she needed just another minute before she could speak without her voice failing her. She gave herself the minute. Then she answered, "Baba." A long pause, the sound of the celebration behind him, distant and golden. "I was wrong," her father said. "It was not too much." She looked out at the lit valley. No. It was exactly enough. In the 2 years since commissioning, the Deir ez-Zor solar thermal project has generated enough electricity to power every household, the school, and the medical clinic continuously, including through winter. Refrigerated medicine storage has been operational at the clinic since month 2. School attendance in the evening study hours has increased by 60%. 4 small businesses have opened in the valley that could not have operated without reliable power. 2 neighboring valleys have initiated feasibility studies based on Nadia's model. Thomas has visited 3 more times. He brings better coffee from Zurich now, which Nadia accepts without comment. Nadia still sleeps in the site office more nights than not. There is always something to calibrate, something to improve, another shaft to assess, another data set to review. She has been offered positions in Dubai, in Berlin, in Washington. She has declined all of them, politely and without hesitation. The extension cord in the kitchen wall has been removed. In its place, a proper electrical fitting, standard and unremarkable, connects to a grid that her daughter helped build. Her father runs the diesel generator for a neighbor now, a man in the next valley who still lives by the old arithmetic. Not for much longer, if Nadia has anything to say about it. She usually does. The light that falls on this valley has always been enough. It just needed someone willing to catch it.